to have. And so why not invite them? They both came, and we were blessed to have them. I am not going to introduce them. They have all of their info and bios and credits in the booklet. Please read that over. They are here for you. They're going to be here until the last session tomorrow, so I believe you guys will leave after the free time. So they're here for you. Use them. Talk to them. Ask the questions. And quick word before Ellen comes up to give us our first session is that we might be getting into some things that might trigger you. I don't know, you may or may not love that word. But as we talk through some of these ideas, concepts, as we go into a deep dive into mental health and our bodies and our spiritual life, there might be things that come up. We're all adults here, but I'm going to give you permission to walk out the room, to go to the bathroom, to walk around. We don't want to coerce you. We know that a lot of these things can be difficult to hear. We're not trying to manipulate at all. If you have questions about anything, please ask. Please ask. If you're struggling with something, please talk about it. We also have a room right across this hallway, right here. It's room number 15. There are 4 lounge chairs, so you could use that room for reflection, for meditation, for you to just get a breather. If you have children and they're acting a little crazy, Carissa, looking at you, you could take your child out there. Without further ado, let me invite up Ellen. Give her a warm applause.
Hi, my name is Ellen Lee. I am the Director of Equipping at Redeemer Counseling Services. So that means I am in charge of doing some of these trainings like Cheech and Marla were talking about that they're in Fellows Program. And it is my absolute pleasure to be here with you guys. We felt very honored when Marla and Cheech told us that they want us to come and do this. And partially because it is who we're doing it for. I know you guys are in ministry, care group leaders, you care for people, and you are here because, obviously you're wanting to have some good time too, but you're here because you want to learn how to love people well, and that is so special to us. So we are so happy to be here, and and I'm looking forward to getting to know some of you through our time together. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more later. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up here, and then I was in the Midwest for 10 years, and then I came back in 2010. So I've been at Redeemer Counseling for 14 years now. And I'm going to do a little bit more of my intro later, but we're going to get started. So you guys have your booklet, and in it you have some notes. But you are going to actually get a PDF copy of all of my slides. So my goal here is for you guys to just take in. There's going to be a lot of info. I'm not trying to be too much, but we're going to get into some things. So just take the time to listen and appreciate what it means for you more than trying to take copious notes because you're going to get all the slides. And but this code is in your slide, and I'm really glad that Cheech did the disclaimer that he did. So as we talk about some things, we're going to get into some biology, some neuroscience. If things come up for you about your own parenting, how you were raised, different things, just make sure you take care of yourself. It's fine, whatever you need to do. And I know it's late at night. You guys have come from a long day of work, traveling down and eating dinner. So whatever you need to do to take care of your body, to take care of your emotions, your feelings, whatever it is, just feel free to do that, okay? So we're gonna start with this quote. So on the top of your page, there's this quote that has a blank. So 70% of favorable outcome in counseling is attributed to what they think it is. And we're gonna try to make this a little bit interactive so that we keep awake and all that. Listening, good, yes. Attitude, okay. What do you mean by attitude? Oh, okay, so attitude of the person counseling, yes. Being counseled, yes. Any other guesses?
Participation.
Yeah. Well, yes, all those things matter. I saw another hand over here.
How about connection between the two?
Yes. And Jeff is right. So it is attribute to the therapeutic relationship. So it just means the relationship. It's the quality of relationship between the counselor and the counselee. That's more than the education the counselor had, or how many years of experience, or what approach they take, whatever else. It is simply the relationship. As you hear that, I hope that's encouraging to you. Because even as you minister to people, what that means is it's not so much about what kind of education you got or anything like that. Of course, it's great that you guys are getting some training and equipping right now, but it really is about the relationship. So I hope that is very encouraging to you. So in the front of your booklet, I wrote this passage down as our theme for the weekend. So Galatians 5:14 says, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So all the Christian life, the whole law, comes down to love. In Romans 13:8, it says the same thing: "The one who loves another has fulfilled the law." So clearly in Scripture, love is important, and we also see that in neuroscience. The more I study neuroscience, more it actually confirms what's in Scripture, which is very, very encouraging. And that makes sense because God created us, and He knows how we are wired. So what science finds out is exactly what's in Scripture. So we want to understand why love is so important, and most importantly, what it looks like to love well. So that's what we're doing here this weekend, learning to care for ourselves and others well. So this is where we're headed this next 2 days. So to love well, first we will understand ourselves. How are we wired? What are we? Why do we do? What do we do? What we do? And all those things will then inform how we minister to each other. So tonight, we're going to try to understand ourselves through the lens of science more. So I'm titling my talk Embodied Souls. And then tomorrow, Josue is going to show us how we are to understand ourselves through the lens of Scripture. GIFT stands for Gospel-Centered Integrative Framework for Therapy. That is the approach that we at Redeemer Counseling Services takes. So Josue is going to kind of walk us through that and how we think about human behavior and human nature through those lenses. And then we're going to shift gears later in the day tomorrow to think about how those things that we have learned about ourselves, implications for how we minister to one another in trauma-informed care and how to listen well. So listening well does matter in that quality of relationship, right? So that's where we're headed. So let's start by asking this question. If we want to understand ourselves well, we have to answer some fundamental questions. These are 3 fundamental questions we want to understand about human beings. Who are we? What is our problem? And what is the solution? And both theology and psychology try to answer those questions. And the picture on the right, the psychology view, is like that zoomed in picture. It's looking at the individual tree, and it gives lots of detailed info about the tree, how to understand the intricacies. So psychology shows us intricacies of human nature, what goes wrong with us, and it also gives us some directions for healing. But even though what we find in psychology aligns with theology, in itself is incomplete. The scope is limited, and it cannot provide the ultimate basis for how we are to understand our identity, worth, meaning, and purpose in life. So it's like missing the forest for the tree, and it does not have ultimate solution to our problems. So Bible gives us the big picture answer to these questions of who we are created to be, what we know, and our ultimate solution. But today we're going to do a deep dive, maybe not so deep, but a little bit into psychology. And then tomorrow we'll talk more about the bigger view of theology. So, embodied souls. We are going to do some biology and neuroscience, but like I said, we're not going to be experts here. I'm not even an expert. I love these things, but I'm not. We're just going to know enough to appreciate the intricacies and the complexities of human behavior. That is the goal. So not to completely understand everything, but to appreciate the intricacies. Let's see. Okay. So have you ever been, this is one of those icebreakers, right? Have you ever been asked a question? What superpower would you like to have if you could have one? Would it be invisibility, ability to fly, superhuman strength, whatever? For whatever reason, mine was always, I want to be somebody else for a day and see the world from that person's perspective. And I think that started because I was a people watcher, but also I was very aware that we do not actually experience the world the same way. And I became more aware of that because I have perfect pitch in music, and so when I hear music, I hear notes. And at some point I realized, oh, not everybody hears that. So I understood that I hear music very differently from maybe somebody else does. So I have no idea what it sounds like to somebody else, right? And we've also seen this, those like things on Facebook. There's a picture, and then people argue for like so many things. No, it's silver. No, it's blue. So we have different perceptions of color. So these things show us that some people are colorblind. They cannot see sort of spectrum. Some people have different taste buds. Some people have more astute taste buds, and others don't. Some love roller coasters, some hate roller coasters. It shows us that we experience the world in our bodies differently. So that's why I wanted to see, what is it like to be somebody else? So we're kind of like snowflakes. There's lots of snow outside. We're same, but unique. So we're all very similar in some ways as human beings. We share humanity, but each one of us are unique. There's not two people who are the same. And it's the same mechanism that God had made us that makes us unique. So we'll get into that a little bit, but a little more about myself. So why I'm interested in this. So that is a picture of me and my son. He's 10 years old now, in one of our favorite spots. That's Acadia National Park in Maine. So I was always interested in people. Like I said, I was a people watcher. I love children. So as an undergrad, I studied human development. That was my major. And if you were to ask me when I was 5 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oddly, my answer was, I want to adopt. I don't even know where they came from. I just think God put it in my heart. And I was a little kid. So a little kid saying, I want to be an adopted mom is kind of weird now that I think about it, but that was always in my heart. So me and my husband, we adopted our son. So they made me do even a deeper dive into understanding childhood trauma, attachment, developmental issues. So that is one of my specialties in counseling. So I specialize in complex developmental trauma and attachment issues. So this is why I am very interested in this topic. So let's get started answering this question of who are we? So first, I said we're embodied souls. That is the whole title of this talk, right? In Genesis 2, we see that God makes a body out of the dust, and He blows spirit into us, breath of life into us. We're material and immaterial. But unlike what most Westerners think, we're not this separate. Those two things are not very separate. They're intricately related, and I want you to understand that there's nothing that your soul can do or feel or think without it registering somewhere in your body as a hormone or a neurological impulse or something. And there's nothing your body can do that does not affect your soul. So we are embodied souls, but very intricately connected. The other thing we understand from nature, general revelation, is that we are creative mammals. What does it mean to be mammals? Science 101. I heard answers, but I didn't know what they...
We have hair.
We have...
Hair.
We have hair? Okay, we do. I don't know if that's the definition though. Maybe I missed it. Mammals, what does it mammal come from? The word? Yeah, mammalian glands. It means we, the babies, are nurtured by mother's milk, right? So by definition, mammals are not born complete. So there are some animals, they hatch out of the shell and then their instinct takes over, they swim to the sea and they're fine, right? That is not us. So human beings, like other mammals, are born incomplete. They need parents' nurture for a time to grow and to become independent. So what that also shows us then is that we're born incomplete, but we're very social. Mammals are social for that reason, because we need somebody else to nurture us. And through the nurturing, we are shown how to do life, right? How to hunt. The eagles, the parents, show the birds how to fly. So there's nurturing and training that happens. So there are more things that we could say, but we could say at least human beings are, one, social, embodied souls, and derived identities. What we mean by derived identity is that we are meaning makers, we interpret things, we think about meaning, but we get those meaning from outside of us, because that's actually how God wired us. And Josue is going to talk more about that from Scripture, because Scripture shows us these exact things, same things, tomorrow morning. But science also shows us that we are these things. And by the end of my talk today, I hope you can see that we are indeed very social, and we have socially derived identities that gets embedded in our bodies. So we'll see what that means. So between 1995 and 1997, CDC and Kaiser Permanente did a study that discovered an exposure that dramatically increases the risk of 7 out of 10 leading causes of death in the US. In high doses, it affects brain development, immune system, hormone system, and even the way our DNA gets expressed and read. Those exposed in extreme high doses have tripled the lifetime of heart disease and lung cancer, and 20-year difference in life expectancy. What do you think this exposure is?
Stress.
Yes, very close. It is not lead, it is not mercury, it is not an environmental toxin. It is adverse childhood experiences. Anybody heard of ACEs before? Yeah, some of you did. Yeah, and that's not actually surprising, because the study was completed in 1997, and it usually says in science, scientific knowledge trickles down to mainstream. It takes over 20 years, so it's just starting to be in the mainstream. But yeah, so the negative things that happened to us, it's actually from adverse childhood experiences. It was actually a medical study. A doctor was looking at people who were having lots of medical issues, and he began to ask these 10 questions, and as a part of the intake process. Have any of these things happened to you before the age of 18? So it's basically a very simple study, 10 questions. So 5 of these are basically what happens to the child, some kind of abuse. So whether physical abuse, emotional abuse, or sexual abuse, or neglect, physical or emotional neglect. So has any of these things happened to you before the age of 18? The other 5 are not things that are happening directly to the child, but something that's happening to somebody in the house. So even if the child is not actually being physically abused, is the mother getting abused? Or does somebody have mental illness? Or does somebody go to jail? Or is using substance? Or divorce? So these are not happening to the child, but happening around the child. And we call these still relational traumas, because what that means is, even though it's not happening to the child, something is happening to a caregiver that makes that relationship probably not optimal. So even though it's not happening to the child, it's affecting the child. And what they found is basically the negative impact to the number of ACEs is basically a straight line. It's what's called a graded dose response, meaning more ACEs you have, the worse your health and mental health outcomes. So these are some of the outcomes that they looked at. So some things are behavioral or mental health outcomes, like smoking, doing drugs, and things like that. But a lot of these are actually health outcomes. So there's heart disease, cancer, stroke, pulmonary disease, liver disease, and all of these things, it's basically a straight line. The more negative events happen to you when you're younger, worse your health and mental health outcomes. So this shocked a lot of people. And I hope it's informative to you that even when we think of as mental health and health, the difference, it's actually very false. They're one and the same to me. It's just different ways things show up in the body. So we find that ACEs are actually indeed common. 2 out of 3 report at least one ACE, so most of us here probably have at least one ACEs, and more than 20% report 3 or more ACEs. And it is actually the best predictor of health, school attendance, and behavior. And educational success is more related to ACEs than parental income. And this is a question to you. What do you think is worse for your health? Having 3 ACEs or more, or smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day?
3 ACEs.
Yeah. Risk of heart attack is greater if you have 3 ACEs more than smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Not saying you should be smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, but it's showing you the impact of your experiences on your body. So why is that? So we're going to get into some understanding, some science of that. But as we try to understand that, we have to have a paradigm shift. So when people think about trauma, they tend to think about an event that happened. Something happened to me, or something happened to somebody, right? So metaphor of an accident. This car accident happened, and we think that's what trauma is. Actually, that's a traumatic event. Trauma is not what happened to a person, but actually what happened in the person's body as a result. So if you think about this collision, traumatic event is the accident, right? But just because the accident is over, the traumatic event is over, can these cars just go back to its normal shape? No. It may not be drivable. Whatever the trauma the cars sustained, it is still there. And without some intentional effort, it cannot go back to its own shape. Go ahead.
Do the ACEs refer to a one-time event in a person's life, or a period, something that happens over a period of time and prolonged exposure?
It doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter in that probably longer term was worse, but the test itself was a very simple test. It just has a simple question: did it ever happen to you? Yeah. So does that make sense? So trauma is what was sustained by the body or these cars. And you can see in this metaphor that depending on the model of the car, the make of the car, the size of the car, the trauma sustained may be different, right? Small cars with thinner metal would be more impacted than others. So the same event can impact people differently, but it is the impact that actually has on the body. So adverse childhood experiences are not just things that happen to a child and then done, but it impacts the person's body. So what does ACEs impact? We're going to look at 4 things: brain wiring, autonomic nervous system default, and you'll understand what that means after I go through it, cellular health, and epigenetics. We'll take one of these at a time. But we're going to do some bio 101. This is a very simplified way of thinking about the body, but we're going to think about the body this way. So we have our organs, right? So our organs are mainly the midsections. And then we have our nervous system. So we have our brain, which is the central nervous system, and then nerves that go through our body, which is our periphery nervous system. And we have our circulatory system that carry blood and oxygen and food and all of good things to our cells. And then our muscular systems, the muscles and skeletons. And the nervous system and the circulatory system is basically our messenger and highway for supplying materials, right? So we said ACEs impact brain wiring, so we're looking at the central nervous system. That's what we're looking at first. So to understand how brain develops, there are 3 principles that we must understand. It develops right to left. The principles are use it or lose it, bottom up. I want everybody to say that. So there's a few things I want you to be able to walk out of this retreat, being able to just spit out. So what are the 3 principles of brain development? Right to left, use it or lose it, bottom up. Okay, we'll talk about one at a time. So think about the proverbial iceberg, right? There's the conscious mind, and then we said there's this big iceberg underneath. That's the unconscious or subconscious mind that has implicit values and other things in it. That is basically brain-wise, left brain, right brain. So the conscious mind is your left brain, your unconscious mind. Not that everything in there is unconscious, but mostly is in your right brain. And if you look at more closely what's in each, what functions are in each, so the left brain has lots of good things, right? It's logical, it thinks in a linear way, it problem solves, it does language, it does math, lots of things. But our 2-year-olds doing a lot of these things, a couple of you had a couple of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, are they doing a lot of these things? No. Our brains develop right brain first. So left brain is second to develop. So babies are mainly taken in the world through the right brain. And if you look at the right brain, it has lots of emotional, affective, relational words, right? Attunement, attachment, nonverbal, like voice quality, eye gaze, touch, and gesture, empathy, feelings, rhythm, motor skills. It is where the felt autobiographical narrative is housed, how the person actually feels implicitly about their life. So when babies are very young, before the left brain develops, they're taking in the world through the right brain, through relationships. So even though the parent may be saying lots of things and the baby doesn't know quite what you're saying because they don't have language yet, they're taking in your tone, they're taking in your look, they're taking in your loving touch, and they're getting a message, just non-verbally. And so that right brain is also where your morality is housed. The reason is, right brain is very fast. I don't know if you've ever heard of, I'm old enough to have known, I've never been in it, but I've known this. Did you ever hear that long time ago, like way back, Coca-Cola used to do this subliminal advertisement? Did anybody hear that, right? They would just flash this quick Coke in a movie, in the middle of a movie, and your brain, you did not know that you saw it, but you saw it, and guess what everybody wanted to do? Go out and get a Coke, right? So that's your right brain seeing it. Left brain is very slow. It has no idea that you saw something, but your right brain takes that information. Because left brain is slow, it is in charge when you're handling familiar things and when you're in moderate stress. And that's how your social self shows up. So the person that I want to be, just like right now, hopefully a calm, nice person who's articulate, that's my social self showing up. But when I get really stressed or triggered, my brain switches back to right. And that's when we get reactive, and I act sometimes the way that I don't want to act. And when you're in that right brain reaction, guess what comes out? Whatever was experienced. So right brain is very experiential. It learned through experience, and so when you're in that stressful moment, when rubber meets the road, what you experience comes out. That's why morality, when that high stress moment happens, lives on the right brain. Does that make sense? Yeah. But then you could ask, but these babies, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 1-year-olds, do they remember? Yes and no, depending on what you mean by remember. So, left brain has explicit memory, what we generally tend to think of as memory. Like I remember when I was 5 years old, my daddy took me to, this amusement park, right? But right brain has implicit memory. Things that we cannot recall, but they're actually remembered in our nervous system, in our bodies. So explicit memory, what age is your first explicit episodic memory? Like, how many of you remember what you did in maybe when you're 5 years old? Yeah. How many of you remember what you did when you're 4 years old? Some. How many of you remember an event in 3 years old? It's getting less, right? Most people's explicit memory start to develop around earliest 3, 4, 5. But before that, we don't remember. But implicit memory is happening before that, right? So my son, implicit memory is in that right brain. My son learned to ride his bike when he was 3 years old. So if you were to ask him, how did you learn it? Where did you learn it? He has no idea. But does that mean he cannot ride a bike? No, he can ride it. And it's actually that earlier you learned it, you probably ride it better. Right? That's called procedural memory. Even though your brain might not remember when you learned it, your body learns something and it gets encoded in your body and you know how to do it. My son is an amazing skier and it's because he learned when he was very young. So it's just in his body. Again, he cannot tell you when he first learned to ski, but he skis well. The other kind of implicit memory, there are several kinds of implicit memory. Another one that most people are aware of is conditioning. It's Pavlov's dog, right? You heard of that from Psycho 101. You ring a bell, you give a dog a meat. You ring a bell, you give dog meat. You do that enough. What happens after a while if you ring a bell? Dog salivates, even if you don't give meat. Because neurons that fire together, wire together. So the dog heard a bell, that's conditioning, so that's associative memory. So the dog heard auditory nerve, right, neuron, heard the noise, and then because it got meat, salivatory neuron got fired. But you did that enough, they just get wired together. So anytime that auditory nerve fires, this salivatory neuron fires together as well. So that's associative memory. Does that all make sense? Yeah. And because these are memories that are actually encoded in your nervous system and in your muscle, they're actually more enduring. And you could actually see that in traumatic brain injury patients, or when people actually lose their memory when they get really old. People who have traumatic brain injury and they don't have good episodic memory or short-term memory, if you ask them, what's your home address? They may not be able to tell you, but if they live there long enough, they know how to get there. Because their body knows how to get there. That's how we know. Sometimes we drive home and we're like, how did I get home? I was thinking about something else, right? Because you have it in your procedural memory. So even though you may not remember, your body's remembering. And to show you that this implicit memory, even though when it happens very young, is very impactful, let me just share this study. So they did a study of 2 groups of children, looking at 2 groups of children and their outcome. So one group is first 2 months of life, they had high adversity with very minimal relational buffer. And the next 12 years, they had healthy relational connection. The second group on the bottom, they had healthy relational connection first 2 months, and the next 12 years, they had high adversity. Guess who fared worse?
Worse. Number 2. Fared worse.
How many say number 2? How many say number 1? Yeah, it's number 1. So earlier stuff happened to you, Even though you may not remember it, worse its impact. And because I work with adoptive families know this very well. Sometimes adopted kids have some fears and anxieties and issues, and lots of times their neighbors will understand that, right? They're like, oh, but he was adopted when he was 0 years old, like he was born. Why is he, he doesn't remember anything. He doesn't remember anything, but his body remembers the separation, the fear, the experience of losing a biological mom. So it impacts them even if they don't have recollection of it. So as I go through this talk, I'm gonna just build this web of complexity so that we just have a visual for it. So far we see that experiences matter, and so parents matter because they're our first experiences, and it's mediated by the age. So things that happen to you earlier is more impactful than things that happen to you later. And it's because our brain, 90% of our critical brain development happens the first 5 years of life. So babies are born with 100 billion neurons, and they're not wired yet. It's like me showing up here. I had a computer that works, you guys have a projector that works, and a mic that works, but guess what I had to do here, come here a little early to do? Connect them, because otherwise it's not going to do any good, right? So that's what babies have to do. They have a lot of wiring to do. So they have organs that work, like eyes that work, and the neurons that are there, but they have to connect, otherwise they don't work. So this comes to a second principle of brain development, use it or lose it. So this is actually a little picture of brain wiring that's happening. What do you notice in the first 2 years of life? Does somebody call it out?
Density.
Yeah, it's just getting really dense, right? Wiring. So all these synapses are forming. What's happening in the years 4 to 6?
Slows down.
Yeah, it doesn't just slow down, what actually happens? It thins out. So that's called synapse pruning. And that's because God has actually made us amazingly. He has made us amazingly to be efficient and to learn and all of that. So that's another metaphor is like my computer, right? So if I had this computer and I started working on it, and if I have every file that I ever opened and created open, and every video I ever played still on there, what would happen to my computer? It's so slow, right? So you need to close some files, you need to clean, you need to defrag, you need to clean up your caches, all of that, to have it go faster. That's the same thing with our brain. Our brain, initially, when it's really young, says, I'm just gonna take in everything, they're like sponges. That's why they look like sponges, because they are actually sponges. But then it gets efficient, and they're saying, oh, I don't really need these files, I could drop them. I need these files, I'm gonna keep them. So whatever gets dropped is whatever you don't use. So a great example of that is language. So babies are born with the ability to hear any sound in any language initially. But then as the years go by, babies unconsciously learn, oh, in English, these sounds are not relevant. So they just stop hearing them. That's why adult learners of languages sometimes have accents, because we literally cannot hear certain sounds anymore. So we keep what we need, we drop what we don't need. That's how amazing our brains are. So that's called activity dependence neogenesis. I'm going to share two studies to illustrate this point. This is the second one. The first one is actually these cats that were born, these kittens. When they're born, they have optical nerves in their brain and they have eyes, but they're put in a sensory deprived room. So not like this. This has things to look at, but the first study is they're put in a sensory deprived room. There's nothing to see. If you keep them there for a critical period of time, when you take them out, they're blind for life. Even though they had eyes and they had optical nerves, they never got wired, so they don't know how to talk to each other. So it's like me having a computer and you guys having a projector, and then we don't have any connection. So this is the second study in which these kittens were put in an environment with their optical stimuli. But if you notice, the kitten on the right is walking around, right? But the kitten on the left is being carried in a harness by the kitten on the right. So it's seeing things, but it's seeing things passively. And what happens to these kittens is that they develop sight, but the kitten on the right develops accurate depth perception. The kitten on the left has very poor depth perception. It's because it didn't move its body to figure out where things were. That's why if you know anybody in early childhood development, they talk about sensory play, sensory play, sensory play. This is the reason why. Their bodies need to wire, and they need to wire while they're moving around and touching and doing things. So you could understand when kids have really healthy environment and they're allowed to play and they're allowed to explore, all of this wires well. But if they live in a deprived, detrimental place like an orphanage institution, you can see why these things will not wire very well. So Dr. Laura Markham of this book, Peaceful Parents, Happy Kids, says this: humans are adaptable precisely because they're unfinished. The baby responds to our environment by building a brain that will best help her to flourish in that environment. And I want you to pause and think about that for 1 second. That's not just physical environment. That's also a social emotional environment. So if kids grow up in a very stressful, conflictual family, they will build a brain that will best survive that. So think about what gets dropped and what gets reinforced. Right? So we are continuing to build into this web. So environment matters, and body remembers these things. The third principle of brain development, bottom up. So this is kind of what it looks like in a child's head. Another way to look at it is back of your brain is your brainstem. This is your limbic system, middle layer, and then your cortical brain goes around it like this. But in your booklet, you have this picture. So this is how brain develops. It literally develops bottom up. So brainstem is mostly wired when they're born. So it's responsible for breathing, heartbeat, keeping them warm, survival. And then second to develop is diencephalon. And a few months later, they start to regulate sleep, appetite, sensory, taking in sensory, and making sense of it, and inputs, things like that. And so that is basically your body brain. And then around 9 months to 7 years, the mid-layer, the limbic system develops. And that is mostly about social emotional things like relationships, emotions, bonding, and they get nurtured. That part of the brain gets stronger through positive nurturing relational experiences. So that teaches them how to control their emotion, how to relate to people. So lots of good things, but that's the second to develop. And then the last to develop is your cortical brain. It has lots of good things like creativity, thinking, self-control, language, lots of good things. That thinking brain, but it is the last to develop. And it starts around really starting around 5. Do you know when it finishes developing? It used to be 25. Now people actually think that it's a little longer. So mostly done by 25, but 32. Yeah, so some of you might still be developing your brain. So, yeah, we can see that it doesn't happen for a long time. So your bottom brain develops first. That's why some of you who have toddlers, they kind of look like they don't have a whole brain. It's because they don't. So they have inability to self-control yet. But why this is important to know is because it's like an upside down triangle. Like a house, if your foundation is faulty, your top layers don't build very well. So even though people may be like, I want to teach my son language when they're 3 years old, it's not really that helpful. Their body needs to be really strong for them to do well. So for example, kids skipping a stage, like a developmental stage, is not something that people, like in the developmental world, celebrate. Because for example, crawling, if you skip that, it's actually really bad for you. Crawling on the ground really strengthens your brain for later studying. Because you have to coordinate left and right. It helps your left side and right side to talk more, and it helps visually track, which helps with reading. So your body brain has to be really strong for your thinking brain to be strong. That's why kids do much better after they play a while outside. And they actually show that kids who play more regularly unstructured outside literally have a bigger cortical brain. Like you can see it on the brain scan. And same thing with the limbic system. The more nurturing environment they have, then it's so strong that they could go on to free up to do learning and thinking. But if you live in a very fearful environment, you kind of get stuck building your brain around the fear center. And it doesn't develop the top brain very well. So we want to be really thinking about brain development. So this is actually an actual scan of 2 3-year-old children. One is a child who grew up in a normal environment. Second is one who has an extreme neglect. What do you see? You said something?
I didn't say anything.
Sorry.
Just one minute.
Yeah. Yeah, sad, right? So you see that one's smaller in size. What else do you see? Yeah, it has gaps. It didn't fill out. It didn't fill out all the centers. So to no fault of their own, if this is what is happening to that child, and then later on they grow up and they have more difficulty doing certain things, whether in school or as an adult. So hopefully I hope this gives you some compassion for what people, where they're coming from and how it might have impacted them. Any questions about that before we go on? All right. If not, let's do a 1 minute, like get up and stretch. Or actually, we could do even a song. I'm like, let's do a song. Let's do a head, shoulder, knees, and toes since we're doing biology. All right. Let's sing and move your body. Head, shoulder, knees, and toes, knees and toes. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Arms and ears and mouth and nose. Head, shoulders, knees and toes. One more time, super fast. Head, shoulders, head, shoulders. Great. Okay, stretch, whatever you need to do, get some water, move your body, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, so we talked about brain wiring. We're going to move on to autonomic nervous system default. So this is what the autonomic nervous system kind of looks like in your body. So it's that peripheral nervous system that goes all through your body. So there are actually 2 different systems in the peripheral nervous system. So it goes from back of your neck all the way to your body. One is called somatic peripheral nervous system, which means like if you're to go get a drink or get some banana, your brain told your body to go get a banana. Walk. If you want to go for a little jog, it tells your body what to do. So it's very controlled, right? You do what you want to do. You go swimming, you go for a walk, or if I want to scratch my head, I can't do that. So that's the somatic. What we're talking about is the autonomic. And what it is your peripheral nervous system connecting directly to your organs to get them to be in a certain state. And autonomic means what? It's automatic. It doesn't involve your conscious thinking. So it takes in some info and signals your organs before you actually consciously think about it. And I'll explain that a little more. But let's say you hear a loud noise. Before you know what it is, your body takes that info and your body gets scared. And it sends certain hormones to get you to then either fight or flight. Right? And then you're trying to figure out what is happening. So it's before you think this is happening. That's what autonomic means. So autonomic could set your body to relax and chill, or it could get you to move and do fight or flight. So there are 3 states, and you might have probably heard 2 of these states. The third one may be new to you. 3 states in the autonomic nervous system. So first is when you're pretty relaxed and calm, and it's also called parasympathetic system. It's rest and digest. So after a nice meal, after a hot bath, you may be in this parasympathetic system. So mostly you're relaxing and just in a calming state. The second is sympathetic system. And I'm going to use this ball to, so you have to do this. You are in a, there we go. You're in a pretty relaxed system, and then sometimes you have to, like I am a little bit sympathetic, which is good, right? I have to stand up here and talk, so if I were going to parasympathetic, maybe it's not good for you. So sympathetic when you have to work or run or do something, your body gets in gear. Or sometimes if there's a tiger coming after you, which doesn't happen to us anymore, but if there is something scary happening, then your body needs to get in gear so that you could either fight that tiger that's coming or run away. So it gets your body to do what it needs to do. So God has wired our body very wonderfully. So it's when you sense danger or stress, it gets into the sympathetic system. So it's fight or flight. The third is dorsal vagal. That's when you sense a life threat or unescapable trauma, stress. So if I sense that there's danger, but I look and see that there's no way I'm going to run away from this tiger or fight it, then my body goes to shut down. Because body is trying to basically save me the pain. So it shuts everything off so that I don't feel it. That's when people sometimes shut down, they feel dissociated a little bit. Animals do this too. They feign death, and it's not faking it, their body's actually going to shut down. It's actually a circuit breaker. The stress level, the cortisol, goes so high that the parasympathetic just shuts it off. You know, it's like your circuit breakers at home, right? When the surge is too high, it just shuts it off. So that's a way God has wired us to protect ourselves. So all 3 states are good and needed as necessary, right? So we should be able to go from work to rest and work to rest. And if you're in real danger, you need to shut down so that you could, that's why people could get into an accident and not feel as much. And then they're like, wow, I don't remember what happened, but like I did feel a lot. That's a good thing, right? So it's all good. What's problematic is when we get something is chronic stress, toxic stress, that we get stuck in a state, or it's too much in that state. Because remember, use it or lose it. So if your life is always in one mode, then that gets overemphasized. Does that make sense? And body only heals and restores in parasympathetic. So if you stay in that stress or dorsal vagal mode, the shutdown mode too long, then your body's wearing down and not healing. So this is generally what happens to a good child, like this situation with a child, right? So there's some threat or there's a need, maybe the diaper's wet, maybe the baby's hungry. So it goes into sympathetic mode, and usually the baby then cries and seeks comfort. And a caregiver comes and changes the diaper or feeds the baby, and then baby goes back into parasympathetic. I feel better now. My need is met, and I'm okay. I feel safe and secure again. So it goes back and forth like that, and so your body learns how to regulate. But if you're in chronic stress or trauma situation, and the threat never goes away, then your body gets stuck here all the time. Or you cry but nobody comes. Or you're in an orphanage and nobody really comes, or your parents for whatever reason couldn't be there, so they are emotionally unavailable. Then they learn that nobody's going to come, so they actually learn to shut down and not cry. But either way, their body's getting stuck in this stress mode, which is wearing their body down, and which means their parasympathetic is underdeveloped because they haven't used it enough, so that the body doesn't know how to get there. So that sets that autonomic nervous system default. So this is kind of a window of tolerance, and all of us have it like a thermostat. Some of us have it really hot, some of it have it really cold. So trauma is stress constricted. So if I was in a lot of stress mode all the time, very little takes me there. It takes very little to get me there. Does that make sense? If I was in a lot of shutdown in my life, then very little needs to happen for me to shut down. And because shutdown is about inescapable stress, if you are having a lot of trauma very young in your life when you're a little baby, which mode do you think you are in more? Sympathetic or dorsal vagus shutdown? Shutdown. Because you really don't have the ability to fight or flight. So your only option is to check out. So the earlier things happen to you, the more likely you're going to check out. So that's why some people, it sets them at this very easily triggered, anxious place or easily shut down, depressive place. So your body gets kind of stuck like that. And when you live in those places a long time, your body gets a lot of disease because the sympathetic nerves are the green. They go through in your spine to all your organs, and they get you to fight, right? Fight or flight. So certain things shut down, like your digestive system, your detoxing, all those things shut down, and then it just gets muscles pumping so that you could get into action. Vagus nerve, parasympathetic system, is vagus nerve. It's the longest nerve in your body. It starts from back of your neck, goes all the way to your stomach, and it touches every organ in your body. And that is what people call the brain-gut connection. It actually goes from your gut to your brain. And it basically does the opposite almost, right? The sympathetic heart speeds up in vagus nerve. Parasympathetic heart slows down, it gets to relax. When that vagus nerve is activated, it does lots of good healthy things, like it shuts off inflammatory activities, boosts the immune system, it detoxes, so lots of health happens. So the more you're able to go there, the better your health outcomes. So this hopefully makes sense why ACEs have so many negative health outcomes for later in life. So healing and restoration in your body only happens when you're in parasympathetic mode, when you're safely connected to people. I just want to say, stress, little bit of stress is needed. Again, it's good for work, and it's also good for muscle building, right? I need to pull a little weight to build my muscle. But even though little stress strengthens me, for that muscle to then restore, it needs to be in parasympathetic. Does that make sense? Restoration and healing only happens in parasympathetic, whether that's physical or emotional. So we talked about brain wiring, we talked about how it sets a certain autonomic nervous system default. Thirdly, it affects our cellular health, and we're almost there, so bear with me. So when stress happens and sympathetic system is kicked in, cortisol is released in your body, and it gets your cells into an inflammatory mode. And again, short-term inflammation is good. It fights your whatever it is. If you got virus, you have a cold, you have a flu, you need to get inflamed so that you can fight the virus. But it changes the way your cells act. It redirects your energy so that it's not doing regular things like detoxing, it's just going to fight the virus. So it changes your energy. So if it's just chronic, then it's not doing other bodily things that it needs to do. Also, when the cortisol is pumping in your body system, it changes your actual cellular molecules. So remember in Biology 101, the DNA, what does it do, Ole? They uncouple, replicate, and then recouple, right? So it's those two strands are always replicating itself. And at the end of those are what's called telomeres. It's like the shoelace. You know, they have these things at the end of the shoelace so that it doesn't tear off. When your body is full of cortisol, these telomeres get short. It's a neurotoxin. Cortisol is a neurotoxin. So when that happens, guess what happens? Every time your cell divides and replicates, more chance of things not going right, or tearing off, or cell not replicating well. So all the aging happens badly because of it. So these kind of stressful experiences actually change your cellular health. And then lastly, it also impacts epigenetics. So epigenetics is not that it's changing your DNA itself, but you may have a DNA for something or a gene for something, but it may or may not get expressed, or how it gets expressed is dependent on your environment. So when they started looking at genome and things like that, people used to worry, and I did too. They're going to find a gene for everything, and they're going to blame everything on gene. It's actually not gone that way. What they're finding is that you may have a gene for something, but it is very environmentally interactive. So depending on your environment and experience, certain genes may or may not get expressed, and how it gets expressed is different. But epigenetics is, once a gene is expressed a certain way, that gene expression can be passed down to your children. So there was a study with Holocaust survivors. They saw a genetic marker, an adaptation of a gene for these survivors of Holocaust. And then when they looked at their children who have never gone through the Holocaust, they found the same genetic expression. They found that they just inherit that, even though they themselves didn't experience it. But what was interesting was, it was actually very validating for the Holocaust survivors' children. Because all their life they were feeling like, what is wrong with me? I'm so anxious all the time, but I have never gone through a hard thing in my life. But they had inherited this gene. So again, it should give you a lot of compassion for what people may be experiencing without even their own knowledge. Another study that shows that is they did this study with, thankfully they do these things with animals, even though that's cruel too. They did the study in Japan with mice. They, association memory, right? They let a mice smell cherry blossom, and then they shocked it. They did that over and over and over. And then the mice clearly learns to fear cherry blossom, right? So 3 generations later, The third generation of mice never got shocked. But guess what they found? When these grandchildren of these mice smell cherry blossom, they tremble. That's what being triggered is. And they may not even know why they're triggered. It got encoded in their body. So we keep building to this complexity. So epigenetics matters, heredity matters, and if epigenetics and heredity matters, then intergenerational trauma matters. What my parents, my grandparents went through matter. And that means your culture and your race matters. Because what your culture went through is part of our history, right? My mom went through the Korean War. That's her trauma, and it's because she grew up in that culture, right? And to add to the complexity, we do have temperament, so this is human complexity, why we do what we do. All these things affect us to make me who I am and make you who you are, very uniquely different. Our temperament matters, our prenatal experience matters, because when you're in your mother's womb, you literally share the same hormone with your mom. So whatever your mom was feeling, your body felt it as well. And your diet and exercise matters, because your diet and exercise is your internal environment. And we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow morning, when I talk about it. But anyways, your diet and exercise matter because that is your internal environment. And your what's the word I'm looking for? Autonomic nervous system does not discriminate between stressors. It does not tell the difference between a virus, environmental toxin, or an emotional stress. It reacts the same way. To your body, it's just a toxin. So if you're eating a really bad diet, guess what? Next day, it's going to happen to you. You get inflamed, right? We know this. Sometimes we eat some bad food at night, and the next morning you wake up and you're like, oh man, things just feel bloated and hurt, and because your body went into inflammation. And we do have a will. So it's not that we don't have a will, but we tend to think that what people do is just a factor of people's will. But that clearly is not the case. We are impacted by all these other things living in the fallen world. So, there you have it. How are you feeling?
Pressed.
Yes, it is kind of sad news, but hopefully this gives you some humility and compassion for the person sitting next to you, or the person who may be in your care group, that even though they may not even know their full story, but you don't know where they have been, where their parents have been, what they're bringing in, and what is making up their life story. So hopefully this will give you some humility and compassion as you meet people and just appreciate the complexity. And sometimes I have to remind myself, somebody who may look like they're doing far worse than me, in some objective, or whatever, if there is such a thing, that it may actually be that they're working harder than me. But they just have more things stacked against them, right, in their body. So just to come with that humility. So that may be depressing, but there is good news. So I'm gonna leave you with some good news, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow, but good news is in neuroplasticity. So somebody, I forget, I don't know your name, but somebody came up and asked, Mirabelle came up and asked, can it be rewired? I said, yes, it can be. So good news is that even through old age, our neurons can be rewired and can change. It does take work, intentional work, just like those cars, but it can be rewired. This is a graph of how much work it takes for change. So when you're younger, obviously, it's much easier. So blue is your ability to change and the amount of effort it takes to change. So around 30, it starts to change. But you can change. So that's one good news. The second good news is that I would be amiss not to mention that one of the most powerful influences we talked about it in some ways in negative, but also for the positive, is power of relationship. Our superpower is really connection. That's what the science shows us. Remember the 70%? The positive outcome in counseling, 70% of it is relationship. It really is relationship. So in 8 studies, later some people did this study, so this is the straight line of relationship. They asked this question. When you're a child, was there one adult, just one, you trusted and you could talk to about your problems? If they said yes to that question, it cut their negative impact by half. That is good news for the church. That is good news to you as care group leaders. It takes one person who loves another person to cut those negative impact by half. So there's a lot of power of good that we have here. So connection matters and faith matters because, and neuroscience shows that too. Faith, spirituality is hugely good for us. Faith is your connection to God, right? Our ultimate safe person. And so lest you think it's just for kids, it's actually adults as well. This is a book that was published. He looked at 3 longitudinal studies to look at what makes for a good life at the end, aging well. He followed like 800 adults. And what he found was, for both the inner city men and the Harvard men, the best predictor of a high income was not their parents' social status or social class, but whether their mother had made them feel loved. It is not whether their mother loved them, but mother felt love. It's that experience, it's that right brain stuff, right? But it is not the bad things that happen to us that doom us, it is the good people who happen to us at any age that facilitate enjoyable old age. So he also saw that in longitudinal study in adult life, what matters most is these good connections, even if it comes late. So when the interviewer asked him, if you were to summarize your findings, what would you say? And this is what he said: happiness is love, full stop. And that's what God calls us to do, love one another. It is corrective relational experiences that we need to rewire and heal and undo some of these things, but it is experience. It's that right brain thing, right? Not knowing, feeling and experiencing. So that brings us to our true superhero. What is our true superhero's name? Jesus. And we just went through the Advent, Christmas. What's his name? Emmanuel, God with us. He's the one who gives us that connection. He walks with us. He's our safe connection. And he literally, unlike me, I can't, but he literally used his superpower to enter our skin and walked and experienced our life so that we could be connected back to God and have that safety and connection. And because he actually walked in our shoes, this is what he's able to say. He says in Hebrews, so Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. For this reason, he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in that time of need. So he gives us mercy, he gives us grace, and he is humble enough, even though he never sinned, that he's able to empathize with our weakness and calls us brothers. So how much more should we with our brothers and sisters? So essential quality of being a good friend or a pastor or a CG leader is humility, compassion, curiosity. Humility and compassion because we are all sinners, sufferers, and saints. And a person's tendencies that may seem so puzzling to us they're understandable in the context of their own story. This is a book I highly recommend it. Bruce Perry, he did some of those research that I talked about. The book title is What Happened to You? I actually recommend it as an audiobook too because he and Oprah wrote it together, but it was actually an interview, so they read it as an interview, so it's actually really easy to listen to. But basically, this is the beginning of trauma-informed care. Not starting with what's wrong with you, but being curious. What happened to you? But I kind of don't like that because it takes will out of it altogether, so I want to say, approach people with that curiosity of, what is your story? Let me hear your story. So everybody is a complex mixture of nature, nurture, and mo. So let's approach people with gentle, humble curiosity and listen with open heart. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to jot down a couple of takeaways, and then we'll do some Q&A. All right, we made it. Thank you so much for being engaged. I know it's late and it's a lot of info, but any questions? And if you want to refer to any particular slides, I could go back to it as well.
So, by the way, this is like light bulbs going off all over the place for me. And I've been so convicted by, especially as being a mother and raising kids, adolescent kids, and we all know some of us know how difficult that can be. So really convicted by a lot of things you said. So how do you suggest that I assess the environment or some of the potential trauma that I may have impacted on my kids? How do I see if that actually has been impacted? And what would you suggest that we do, whether it's our friends or family members or children? How do you suggest that we take by way of practical steps in order to see, did we do these things? Has it impacted them in negative ways? If so, what are the remediations for that? How do we apply this maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to talk tomorrow about how we apply this in ministry, how you think about care group and how you meet with people. But in terms of family, if you're thinking through that, I think part of it is looking at their behavior. That may sound too vague, but what I mean by it is, so it's what they took in, they live out, right? So in parenting, more is caught and taught, unfortunately, because this is true, right brain province. So you might teach lots of good things on the left brain, but if you don't actually let them experience it on the right, guess what's going to win that right brain? So it's looking at behavior. So for example, things like, one of the things that I'm always looking at is when my son is having some kind of an emotional hardship, does he come to me? Or how does he handle it? Does he shut down? Does he lose it? Or does he know how to come to me and ask for help? And if he could come to me and ask for help and regulate, that's a good sign, right? So things like that. Also, when, what was I going to say? So how he deals with emotions. There was one thing that I was going to say. Even things like, so far, thankfully, so I'm looking at things that God says, is he able to, how I would want him to relate to God? Does he relate to me that way or relate to other people that way? So for example, he still, thankfully, loves to, maybe not loves to, but comes to me and loves to confess. He's like, Mommy, did you know that I got in trouble today? Blah, 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 blah. And he just likes to tell me because that means he feels safe. And he knows I'll meet him with grace. Maybe not always, but enough that he feels safe enough to do that, right? And there was one time when his friends said they were doing something, and my son Asher, his name is Asher, and she was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that because then I will feel bad and I have to tell my mom." And his son said, "You don't have to tell her." And then Asher said, "But I want to." So that's a good sign, right? So it's kind of looking at what happens when hard things happen, how do they respond, and what have they internalized. And if you're seeing things that, like for example, they tend to shut down and they don't talk about it, or then it's like, okay, we have some work to do there. And how do we begin to create an environment where they can start to talk about it or ask for help or whatever it is. Does that help? Because you mentioned teenager, I'll just say this. So brain development-wise, so size-wise, by age 5, it's 80%. Full size is when they hit puberty. So girls hit that first. Girls hit full-size brain by around 14, boys 13, 14. When teenager brain, what happens is they get a upgrade. So size is full, but they get an upgrade. They get bathed in hormones. And it gets super fast. That's why they act like they know everything, because they think they do, because their brain processing is like so fast. But when they get an upgrade, it also gets upgraded bottom up, which is why they're more risk-taking, they're really into social, but their self-control is just lacking. So just know that part of it is biology, so I have lots of compassion for it. Other questions?
You started with to love well, we need to understand ourselves, and then you talked about how being our superhero powers connection. But if we're broken or we don't really see ourselves or understand ourselves, it may be that we need to get healing first before we're able to be good connectors.
Yes. Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I will just repeat. She was saying if we have to understand ourselves and we want to be doing good connection with other people, but if you are not understanding yourself and haven't done your own work, it's hard to be that good connector to other people. Absolutely. You could only give to others what you have. That's true of other people or even your children. You cannot give to your children what you encounter. So the first part of good parenting is working on yourself. Other questions?
If you know someone who grew up in a fearful environment, what would be the best way to make them feel connected, or some simple steps to help them feel connected?
Yeah, great question. And again, we're going to spend more time on that. But if they grew in a really fearful environment, your goal is to help them feel more safe, right? But it is a lot of just think in terms of sensory experience. But you have to also ask them because it's very individual. But you start with a bit of what they already feel safe with, and you build on that. That's why sometimes animal therapy is what it is. If people don't feel safe yet with people, you start with animals. That's still a connection, and you build up. So it's what do you feel safe with? What kind of things make you feel like it's safe and good connection? Is it walking together? So sometimes like doing deep discussions like this is very scary for people who grew up in a scary environment. So it may be like, let's go for, teenagers, side by side is much better than face to face. It's maybe going for a short walk or whatever it is, but you need to kind of ask them and just work together to figure out what that is.
So, isn't it possible that if you have all these people coming to you and telling you all their problems, that you can also experience trauma secondarily?
Yeah.
And then, like, how do you work through that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a long answer. They could be a whole workshop in itself, right? But yes, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma is a real thing. So some of it is that you have to know your limit, you have to know your boundaries, but also it's like how you do self-care, right? What do you do after? Do you have a good connection with God after? Do you carry it yourself, or are you able to release it? Yeah, so there are lots of self-care that you could do to make that not as hard. One last one, and then I'm going to turn over to Marla.
So there's a lot of impact when you're younger and you experience many cases. Does that mean that if you experience any kind of trauma when you're older, that there's potentially less of a lasting impact?
Yeah, so it is mediated by age, and also, unfortunately, this is bad news, but unfortunately, past trauma beget trauma. So if you have early history of trauma, later trauma impacts you worse. As opposed to, so part of answer to your question is, if I didn't have that much trauma growing up, and I have really good relational buffer and support, and I have a traumatic event, yes, that's going to impact me far less. Then either I don't have the support, or I've had other traumas. It's kind of like grooves, right? Like if I made a groove somewhere once, it's easier to make that groove further as opposed to a new scratch somewhere. So once you kind of have a neural pathway that went down this trauma path, it actually, next trauma impacts you more deeper. That's why people went through 9/11 and not everybody was impacted the same way. But they, again, see that the best buffer for resiliency is social connection. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And someone actually made the, I know it's late, but someone made the good suggestion that maybe we could just give a few minutes for worship to close right now and transition into the next thing. So I know we're going a tiny bit late, but Gustavo and Hannah are very graciously on the spot going to give us accompaniment for singing, what's the name of the song? Full Attention. Yeah, oh, yeah, we know Full Attention, right? We don't need the slides. Well, if you know the words, just really sing them out, and hopefully we can have a worship moment and then I'll close this for the evening. They are really amazing superheroes right now to do this. Does anyone feel comfortable leading the singing for it? Because she's going to play the piano and he's going to play the guitar. If not, we'll just all belt. But if anyone is game, please, you get the mic. Oh yeah, maybe find the lyrics on your phone.
What's the name of the song?
Full attention.
Clear voice. Your voice be louder. May your voice be clearer than all the others, and all the others. May your face be clearer. May your words be sweeter than all the others, and all the others. Let my life speak, my life is on you.
Thank you all so much. Let me close our time in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you and we are really maybe humbled or weighed down, and there might be different ways that we're responding to this, and we're so glad that you are a God who has made us this way. You loved us, you formed us, you know all the days and put them in your book. And so even when we consider things that are maybe almost painful, we can just turn to you. And so we do that this weekend. I'm so thankful for each person who showed up for this, and I pray that this really will bear fruit and that we'll grow over the weekend, closer to one another, and so much closer to you. We love you and thank you and praise you. Pray all those things in your name.